Elena Shaw's words cut through the frozen Montana air like a blade. She stood before Caleb Rourke, a man whose eyes held more winter than the wasteland surrounding them. This wasn't a marriage proposal. It was a transaction. A deal forged in desperation and sealed with ice-cold pragmatism. But some agreements, once made, can't stay simple. Some contracts ignite. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Elena Shaw gripped the worn leather seat to keep from being thrown forward. Dust billowed through the gaps in the wooden frame, coating her already filthy traveling dress in another layer of Montana grit. She'd been on the road for 8 days. 8 days of rattling bones, stale bread, and the constant company of strangers who asked too many questions. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as tree bark. Elena peered through the clouded window. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling hills covered in dead grass, skeletal trees clawing at a steel-gray sky, and somewhere in the distance, mountains that looked like they could swallow the world whole. This was the edge of everything, the place where civilization gave up. And somewhere out there was Caleb Rourke's ranch. She stepped down from the coach, her boots sinking into the half-frozen mud. The wind hit her immediately, sharp enough to steal breath, carrying the smell of livestock and wood smoke. The driver tossed down her single trunk, everything she owned in the world packed into a box that weighed less than most women's hope. "You sure about this?" The driver's eyes held something between pity and judgment. "Awful long way to come for whatever you came for." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I'm sure." She wasn't. But certainty was a luxury she'd lost 3 months ago when her father's debts had been called in, when the Boston creditors had stripped the house bare, when her last remaining option had been a newspaper advertisement that read like a death sentence dressed up as opportunity. Widow seeks arrangement, must be willing to relocate, discretion essential, compensation provided. The driver shook his head, climbed back onto his perch, and within moments, the stagecoach was disappearing into the distance, leaving Elena alone with her trunk and the weight of her choices. She didn't have to wait long. A wagon appeared on the dirt road, pulled by 2 massive draft horses that looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. The man driving them was broad-shouldered and silent, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat that had seen better decades. He pulled the wagon to a stop 10 feet away and just looked at her. Elena straightened her spine. She'd learned early that men like this respected strength more than beauty, directness more than charm. "I'm Elena Shaw. I'm expected at the Rourke Ranch." The man climbed down slowly, as if every movement cost him something. When he finally looked up, she saw a face weathered by years of hard labor, deep lines around the eyes, a scar running from temple to jaw, and the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. "Tom Garrett. Foreman." His voice was gravel and whiskey. "Boss sent me to fetch you." He loaded her trunk into the wagon bed with surprising gentleness, then gestured for her to climb up. Elena settled onto the wooden bench, and they began moving without another word. The silence stretched for miles. Elena watched the landscape change in subtle ways, the dead grass giving way to rocky outcroppings, a frozen creek bed cutting through the earth like a scar, fence posts marking boundaries in a place that seemed to recognize no boundaries at all. The cold seeped through her coat, her dress, straight into her bones. "How far?" she finally asked. "Another hour." Tom kept his eyes on the road. Then, after a long pause, "You know what you're getting into?" "I know what I agreed to." "That ain't the same thing." Elena turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Tom was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and careful. "Caleb Rourke is a hard man. Fair, mostly. Pays decent. Works harder than any 3 men I've known. But he ain't built for softness. Whatever you're expecting, whatever the letters said, reality's going to be colder." "I'm not expecting softness," Elena said. "I'm expecting survival." Tom glanced at her then, something shifting in his weathered face. "Yeah, I reckon you might do all right." The ranch appeared gradually, like something emerging from a dream that couldn't decide if it was a promise or a threat. First more fence posts, then a windmill, its blades turning slowly in the relentless wind. Then the buildings themselves, a main house built from rough timber and stone, a barn that dwarfed it, several smaller outbuildings scattered across the property like afterthoughts. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, the only sign of life in all that emptiness. Tom brought the wagon to a stop near the front porch. Before Elena could move, the door opened, and there he was. Caleb Rourke was tall, taller than she'd expected from his letters, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe and hands that looked like they could break fence posts as easily as promises. His hair was dark, cut short, and his face was all hard angles and sharper edges. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were the color of winter ice, and they held about as much warmth. He looked at her the way a rancher might assess livestock at auction, measuring, calculating, determining value. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. No greeting, no welcome, just observation. Elena climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. "You're exactly what I expected." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. It vanished before she could be sure. "Tom, get her trunk inside, second bedroom." Caleb's attention shifted back to Elena. "You eat yet?" "Not since this morning." "Come inside. We'll talk while there's still daylight." The house was sparse. A front room with a stone fireplace, a heavy wooden table, chairs that looked homemade, and almost nothing else. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no photographs or paintings or any of the small decorations that turned a house into a home. It was shelter, nothing more. A pot hung over the fireplace, something inside it giving off steam and a smell that made Elena's empty stomach clench with hunger. Caleb ladled out 2 bowls of stew, venison, she thought, with root vegetables that had seen better days, and set them on the table along with thick slices of bread. They ate in silence. Elena was too hungry to care about manners, and Caleb seemed to prefer quiet to conversation. She watched him between bites, the way he moved with deliberate economy, wasting no motion, no energy, every action purposeful, every moment measured. When the bowls were empty, he pushed back from the table and finally spoke. "I assume you remember the terms." "Yes." Elena's voice was steady. "1 year. I stay on the ranch. In exchange for room, board, and payment, I agree to bear a child. Once the child is born and healthy, I receive the remainder of the agreed-upon sum and can either stay or leave. My choice." "And you understand what that means?" It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "I understand perfectly." Caleb studied her face like he was trying to read something written there in invisible ink. Most women wouldn't. Most women had better options. "What happened to yours?" The question was direct enough to be rude, which meant it was honest. Elena appreciated honesty more than courtesy. "My father died. Turned out he'd been borrowing against the house for years. Bad investments, worse gambling. The creditors took everything. My mother passed when I was young, and I have no siblings, no husband, no prospects." She met his gaze without wavering. "So I answered your advertisement, and here I am. You could have found work. Teaching, maybe, or as a governess." Elena's laugh was sharp. "Making $30 a year while some family works me 16 hours a day and treats me like a servant they're doing a favor? No thank you. At least here the terms are clear. The transaction is honest." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're not what I expected." "You already said that." "I mean your attitude. Most women who answer ads like that, they come with hope. They think they can change things, make it into something it's not. I'm not most women." Elena leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to change you, Mr. Rourke. I'm not here to make you love me or turn this arrangement into some fairy tale. I'm here because I need security and you need an heir. That's all. That's enough." For the first time since she'd arrived, something almost like approval crossed his face. "All right then." He stood, pushing his chair back. "I'll show you the house. Your room's upstairs. There's a washroom down the hall. Tom keeps the water heated most evenings. Meals are at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. You're free to move around the property, but don't go past the north fence line. There's wolves up there." Elena followed him through the house, cataloging every detail. The kitchen was functional but basic. The washroom was surprisingly well equipped. A large copper tub, a working pump, shelves stocked with soap and towels. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the second floor was even more austere than the first. 3 doors. He opened the middle one. The bedroom was small. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the dead fields. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed where Tom had left it. "This is yours," Caleb said. "Mine's at the end of the hall." The implication hung in the air between them. Elena turned to face him directly. "When do you want to start?" The bluntness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. His jaw tightened slightly. "You just got here, and we both know why I'm here. There's no point in pretending otherwise." Caleb's eyes, those ice-cold eyes, searched her face. "You really don't have any illusions about this, do you?" "None." "Good." He stepped back into the hallway. "Get settled. We'll talk more tomorrow." He turned to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. "Mr. Rourke? What? What happened to your first wife?" The temperature in this hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb's entire body went rigid, his hand gripping the doorframe hard enough that his knuckles went white. "That," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "is none of your business. If I'm going to be living here, she's dead. That's all you need to know." He met Elena's eyes, and for the first time she saw something besides cold calculation. She saw pain, raw and deep and carefully buried. "We don't talk about her. Not now. Not ever. Understood?" Elena nodded slowly. "Understood." He disappeared down the hall, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. A moment later, she heard a door close with more force than necessary. Elena stood alone in the small room, listening to the wind howl against the window. She'd asked the question knowing it was dangerous, needing to understand what kind of man she'd bound herself to. Now she had her answer. Caleb Rourke was a man haunted by ghosts, protected by walls, and determined to keep both firmly in place. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe, arranging her books on the dresser. The physical act of settling in did nothing to settle her nerves. She'd known this wouldn't be easy. But knowing and experiencing were different things. Night fell quickly in Montana, the darkness absolute and suffocating. Elena washed her face in the basin, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. The mattress was firmer than she was used to, the blankets heavy but warm. Outside, something howled in the distance. Those wolves Caleb had mentioned, probably. The sound was lonely and wild and perfect for this place. Sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the choices that had led her here. Boston seemed like another lifetime. The furnished parlor, the calling cards, the carefully orchestrated social events, all of it had been a performance, a dance around the truth that her family was drowning in debt. When her father died, the performance ended. The curtain came down, and she'd been left standing in the wreckage, holding nothing. The advertisement had appeared in the paper 3 weeks later. She'd read it a dozen times before she'd had the courage to respond. The letters that followed had been businesslike, cold but honest. Caleb Rourke didn't want a wife. He wanted a mother for his future children. He'd pay well for the service. No love required. No attachment expected. It had seemed straightforward enough in writing. Reality, as Tom had warned, was much colder. Morning came gray and bitter. Elena woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Heavy footsteps, the clatter of pots, the creak of the front door opening and closing. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair and pinning it up, then made her way down to the kitchen. Caleb was at the stove, cooking eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced at her briefly. "Coffee's ready? Cups are in the cabinet." Elena poured herself a cup and sat at the table. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and it was something to do with her hands. Caleb served breakfast without ceremony. Eggs, bacon, more of that dense bread. They ate in silence again, and Elena wondered if this was how every meal would be. No conversation, no connection, just fuel consumed out of necessity. When they'd finished, Caleb stood and grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. "I've got work to do," he said. "Tom will show you around if you want. Stay close to the house today." "Wait." Elena stood as well. "When are we going to talk about the arrangement?" Caleb's hand froze on the doorknob. "What's there to talk about? You know the terms." "Yes, but—" "Then we're done talking." He pulled the door open, letting in a blast of frigid air. "I don't need a wife, Miss Shaw. I need a mother for my children. The less we complicate that, the better." And you think pretending I don't exist is going to make this work? He turned back then, his face hard. I think you came here understanding what this was. Don't try to make it something else. I'm not trying to make it anything. I'm trying to understand how we're supposed to... She stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound desperate. You can't just ignore me. Watch me. The door slammed shut behind him, rattling the windows. Elena stood in the sudden silence, anger and frustration warring in her chest. She'd expected coldness. She'd prepared for distance. But this wasn't distance. This was erasure. He wanted her invisible, present but not seen, functional but not real. She wouldn't do it. The day passed slowly. Tom showed her around the property. The barn where 24 cattle huddled against the cold. The henhouse where chickens pecked at frozen ground. The storage buildings filled with equipment and supplies. He explained the ranch's operations with the patience of a man who'd explained them many times before. Caleb raised cattle primarily, some horses, sold beef to the military fort 30 miles south. The work was brutal in winter, manageable in summer, and never easy. He built all this himself? Elena asked as they stood looking at the main house. Most of it. Had help with the barn, but yeah, rest was him. Took him 6 years. Tom's weathered face softened slightly. Man works like he's trying to outrun something, always has. His first wife? Tom's expression shuddered immediately. Ain't my story to tell. Everyone keeps saying that, but I'm living in her house, sleeping in her... Different room, Tom interrupted. Caleb tore that one down. Built this one new. Elena absorbed that information slowly. He tore down the room? Tore down half the house. Started over. Tom looked at her then, his eyes serious. Whatever demons that man's fighting, they're his to fight. Best you can do is stay out of the way. But Elena was discovering she didn't want to stay out of the way. Something about Caleb Rourke's determined coldness made her want to push back, to refuse erasure, to insist on being seen. It was probably foolish. It was definitely dangerous. She did it anyway. That evening she cooked dinner. Caleb came in at 6, covered in dirt and exhaustion, and stopped dead when he saw the table set with plates, the pot of stew she'd made from the provisions in the larder, fresh bread wrapped in cloth. What's this? His voice was suspicious. Dinner. I thought I should start earning my keep. I didn't ask you to cook. You didn't ask me not to. Elena ladled stew into his bowl. Sit down before it gets cold. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. He stood in the doorway, coat still on, looking at the table like it was a trap. Then, slowly, he moved, hung up his coat, washed his hands at the basin, sat down. They ate. The stew was good. She'd always been a decent cook, and she watched his face for any reaction. He gave none. You don't have to do this, he said finally. Do what? Play house, cook meals, act like... Like what? Like I live here? Elena set down her spoon. I'm going to be here for a year at minimum, Mr. Rourke. Possibly longer. I can either spend that time hiding in my room and eating bread and cheese, or I can make myself useful. Which would you prefer? His jaw tightened. I prefer you remember what you're here for. I remember perfectly. Do you? They locked eyes across the table. The firelight cast harsh shadows across Caleb's face, making him look even more forbidding than usual. But Elena didn't look away. You're trying to make this complicated, he said. No. I'm trying to make this bearable. For who? For both of us. Caleb pushed back from the table abruptly. I don't need things to be bearable. I need them to be clear. They're clear. You want a child. I've agreed to give you one. But that doesn't mean I have to disappear in the meantime. Maybe it does. Why? Because your first wife... Don't! The word came out sharp as a whip crack. Caleb's hands were clenched into fists. I told you, we don't talk about her. Then talk about you. Talk about why you're so determined to keep me at arm's length when we both know... Because it's easier. The words exploded out of him, harsh and sudden. He stood there breathing hard, looking like a man who'd just revealed something he'd meant to keep buried. Because caring makes things complicated. Because attachment means risk. And I don't... He stopped, collected himself. I don't do that anymore. The silence that followed was thick and charged. Elena spoke quietly. I'm not asking you to care. I'm asking you to acknowledge I exist. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the room. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard his bedroom door close. Elena sat alone at the table, the fire crackling, the stew growing cold. She'd pushed. He'd pushed back, and somewhere in that exchange she'd seen the truth. Caleb Rourke wasn't cold because he didn't feel. He was cold because he felt too much. The days fell into a pattern. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, barely speaking, barely acknowledging her presence. Elena cooked, cleaned, explored the property, and refused to be invisible. Every dinner was a silent battle. Every morning, a fresh standoff. A week passed. Then 2. And then on the 15th night, Caleb knocked on her bedroom door. Elena was reading by lamplight when she heard it. 3 measured knocks, deliberate and heavy. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She knew what it meant. Knew why he was there. Come in. He opened the door but didn't enter. Just stood in the hallway, backlit by the dim light from downstairs. His face was shadowed, unreadable. If you've changed your mind, he said, say so now. Elena closed her book slowly. I haven't changed my mind. This won't be... He stopped, started again. I can't give you what you might want. I don't want anything except what we agreed to. He nodded once. Then finally, he stepped into the room. What happened next was exactly what it was supposed to be, a transaction, clinical and purposeful. Caleb approached it with the same careful efficiency he brought to every task. No tenderness, no passion, just obligation fulfilled. Except there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when Elena felt his hands shake slightly, when his breath caught, when something besides duty flickered in his eyes. Moments when the walls cracked just enough to let through a glimpse of the man underneath. Afterward, he left without a word. Elena lay in the darkness, her body still humming with unfamiliar sensations, her mind racing. It should have felt empty. Hollow. It was exactly what she'd agreed to, sex without love, intimacy without connection. So why did it feel like something more had just happened? The pattern continued. Every third night, Caleb would knock. Elena would answer. And in the darkness of that small room, with the Montana wind howling outside, they would fulfill their agreement. But something was changing. Caleb started lingering afterward. Not long, just a few minutes. Sitting on the edge of the bed, silent, like he was working up the courage to say something he couldn't quite voice. He never did. But the fact that he stayed at all felt significant. Elena found herself waiting for those nights. Not just because of the physical act, though she was surprised to discover it wasn't as awful as she'd feared, but because those were the only times Caleb let his guard drop even slightly. In those quiet moments after, she could see past the walls to the lonely, wounded man underneath. And despite every promise she'd made to herself, despite every intention to keep this simple, she was starting to care. One night, about a month after she'd arrived, they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, but not apart either. The wind rattled the window. The fire downstairs had burned down to embers, and the cold was creeping in around the edges. "Why Montana?" Elena asked quietly. She felt rather than saw Caleb tense beside her. "What? You could have built a ranch anywhere. Why here? Why the middle of nowhere?" Silence stretched. She'd pushed too far again, asked too much. But then, because here, people leave you alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the armor. "Is that what you want? To be left alone?" Another pause. "It's safer." "Safer than what?" "Than the alternative." Elena turned her head to look at him, though she could barely see his face in the darkness. "What happened to her? Your wife?" She expected anger. Expected him to leave, to shut down, to rebuild the walls higher than before. Instead, she heard something break in his voice when he spoke. "She left." 2 words, simple, devastating. "She left," he said again, like he needed to hear it himself. 3 years ago. "We'd been married 4 years. I thought..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought we were building something, but I was building alone. She was just waiting for a way out." Where did she go? Back east, to the man she'd actually loved, the one her parents wouldn't let her marry. His laugh was bitter. Turns out I was the consolation prize, the second choice, good enough to escape to, not good enough to stay for. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Caleb, don't. He sat up, the moment shattering. Don't pity me. And don't think this, he gestured between them, is anything like that. This is different. This is clear. Is it? He looked at her then, really looked at her. And for a moment she saw everything. The pain, the fear, the desperate need to protect himself from feeling anything real. It has to be, he said. Then he stood, pulled on his clothes, and walked out. Elena lay alone in the bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart aching for a man who'd been so thoroughly broken that he'd convinced himself numbness was the same as strength. She was falling for him. Against all logic, against all intention, she was falling for Caleb Rourke, and it was going to destroy them both. Winter came down hard the next week, transforming the Montana landscape into something even more unforgiving. Snow fell in thick curtains that erased the horizon, wind howled through gaps in the barn walls, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the buckets overnight. Elena woke each morning to frost patterns on her window that looked like skeletal fingers reaching across the glass. Caleb became even more distant after the night he'd told her about his wife. He left the house before dawn, came back after dark, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. At meals, he ate quickly and in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate like it held answers to questions he wouldn't ask. The nights he came to her room became mechanical again. No lingering, no conversation, just the fulfillment of their agreement before he disappeared back down the hall. Elena told herself it was fine. This was what she'd signed up for. Distance, transaction, simplicity. But her heart wasn't listening. She caught herself watching for him during the day, looking out the kitchen window to see if she could spot him working near the barn or riding out to check the fence lines. She cooked meals she thought he might like, even though he never commented on the food. She stayed awake some nights, listening to the floorboards creak as he moved around in his room, wondering what kept him from sleeping. It was ridiculous, dangerous, exactly the kind of attachment she'd promised herself she wouldn't form. Tom noticed, of course. The old foreman had a way of seeing things people tried to hide. "You're getting in deep," he said one afternoon as they fed the chickens together. The hens clustered around their feet, pecking at scattered grain, oblivious to the cold. Elena kept her eyes on the work. "I don't know what you mean." "Yeah, you do." Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "I've been watching you watch him, and I've been watching him try not to watch you. He barely acknowledges I exist. That's how you know he's noticing." Tom scattered another handful of grain. "Man like Caleb, he don't ignore things that don't matter to him. He ignores things that matter too much." Elena stopped, the feed bucket heavy in her hands. "What am I supposed to do, Tom? Pretend I don't care?" "Might be safer. I didn't come here for safe." "No," Tom agreed. "You came here to survive. Just make sure you still can when this is over." The words haunted her for days. When this is over. As if there was an ending already written, as if the only question was how much damage they'd do to each other before reaching it. The storm hit on a Tuesday. Elena had seen storms in Boston, rain that turned streets to rivers, wind that rattled windows, thunder that shook the walls. But Montana storms were different. They didn't just arrive. They attacked. The sky turned the color of old bruises, the wind picked up until it sounded like something alive and angry, and the snow came down so thick she couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. Caleb was out in it. He'd left that morning to check the north fence line, the one he'd warned her about that first day. Tom had tried to talk him out of it. The storm was forecast, anyone could see it building, but Caleb had gone anyway, stubborn and determined as always. Now the storm was here, and he wasn't back. "He'll be fine," Tom said, though his eyes kept darting to the window. "Man knows this land better than anyone. He'll find shelter, wait it out." "And if he doesn't?" Tom didn't answer. By nightfall, the storm had intensified into something monstrous. Wind screamed around the house, battering the walls, finding every crack and gap. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on the inside of the glass. Elena couldn't sit still. She paced the kitchen, the front room, back to the kitchen. Each circuit brought her to the window, searching the white chaos for any sign of movement. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Tom said from his chair by the fire. He'd stayed at the house instead of returning to his cabin, too dangerous to travel even that short distance. He should be back by now. Should and will ain't always the same thing in weather like this. So we just wait? Unless you got a better idea. Elena did have an idea, but it was insane. She pushed it down, tried to ignore it, but it kept resurfacing like something floating in dark water. Caleb was out there alone, possibly hurt, possibly lost, and she was standing here doing nothing. I could go look for him, she said. Tom's head snapped up. Absolutely not. He could be fine. And even if he ain't, you going out there won't help. You'll just get yourself killed, and then I'll have 2 people missing instead of 1. Tom's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. You stay put. That's an order. You're not my boss. No, but I'm the one with sense enough to know suicide when I hear it. They stared at each other across the fire. Elena knew he was right. Going out into that storm would be idiotic, reckless, probably fatal. She had no idea where to look, no experience with blizzards, no survival skills worth mentioning. But the thought of Caleb out there alone, cold, hurt, waiting for help that wouldn't come, made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. How long do we wait? She asked quietly. Tom's face softened. Till morning. If he's not back by first light, we'll organize a search. Me and the boys from the neighboring ranch will find him. And if he's dead by morning, then he was dead an hour after the storm hit, and there's nothing we could have done. The brutal honesty of it made Elena flinch, but she nodded, sat down in the chair across from Tom, and waited. The night stretched endlessly. The storm battered the house with relentless fury. Tom dozed in his chair, but Elena couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Caleb's face, those ice-cold eyes that hid so much, that hard jaw that never relaxed, those hands that shook when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Around midnight, she heard it. A sound beneath the wind, faint, rhythmic, like something hitting wood. Elena was on her feet immediately. Tom, wake up! The old foreman jerked awake. What? Listen. They both went silent. There it was again. 3 heavy thumps, a pause, then 3 more. Tom was moving before Elena could react, grabbing his coat, lighting a lantern. Stay here. Not a chance. She followed him to the front door. Tom yanked it open, and the storm tried to tear it from his hands. Wind and snow blasted into the house, extinguishing the fire, scattering papers from the table. Tom held the lantern high, and in its weak circle of light, Elena saw him. Caleb. He was on his knees on the porch, one hand gripping the railing, the other hanging useless at his side. His face was white as the snow around him, his lips blue, his eyes barely focused. Blood had frozen in a dark line down the side of his face. Help me get him inside! Tom shouted over the wind. Together, they hauled Caleb into the house. He was conscious, but barely, his body shaking so hard his teeth rattled. Tom kicked the door shut while Elena grabbed blankets from the chest near the fire. Get those wet clothes off him, Tom ordered, already working on Caleb's boots. We gotta get him warm fast or we'll lose him to hypothermia. Elena's hand shook as she unbuttoned Caleb's coat, his shirt. His skin was ice cold beneath her fingers, and when she pulled the fabric away, she saw the injury, a gash along his ribs, deep and ugly, bleeding sluggishly. What happened? She asked, but Caleb couldn't answer. His eyes kept sliding shut, his head lolling forward. Stay awake, Tom commanded, slapping Caleb's face lightly. Come on, boss, stay with us. Between them, they stripped off the wet clothes and wrapped Caleb in blankets. Tom rebuilt the fire to a roaring blaze while Elena heated water, found clean cloths, tried to remember everything she'd ever learned about treating wounds. It wasn't much. How bad is it? She asked as she cleaned the gash. Tom examined it closely. Needs stitches. Probably caught himself on barbed wire or a fence post. Lucky it ain't deeper. I don't know how to stitch a wound. Then you're about to learn. Tom found a needle and thread, actual sewing thread, because apparently that's what you used when the nearest doctor was 30 miles away in a blizzard. He showed Elena how to pinch the skin together, how to push the needle through, how to tie off each stitch. Her hand shook the entire time, but she did it. Caleb groaned when the needle first pierced his skin, but he didn't pull away. Didn't fight. Just endured. When it was done, 15 crooked, uneven stitches that would definitely leave a scar, Tom bandaged the wound and sat back. Now we wait. Keep him warm, keep him hydrated, and hope like hell infection don't set in. They moved Caleb to the couch near the fire. Elena piled every blanket in the house on top of him, then sat beside him, watching his face for any change. His shaking gradually subsided. His breathing evened out. But he didn't wake. Tom made coffee, strong and bitter, and handed her a cup. "You did good." "I didn't do anything." "You kept your head. That's something." He settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Damn fool, I told him not to go out there." "What was he checking?" "Fence line. Said he'd heard wolves the night before, wanted to make sure they hadn't broken through." Tom shook his head. "Could have waited till after the storm. But Caleb don't wait for nothing. Always pushing, always working, like if he stops moving he'll remember things he'd rather forget." Elena looked down at Caleb's face, pale and drawn even in sleep, lines of pain etched around his mouth. "He's running from himself." "That he is. Has been for 3 years. Don't seem to be working, but he keeps trying." They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside and the fire crackle inside. Elena held her coffee cup but didn't drink. She couldn't stop looking at Caleb, couldn't stop thinking about how close he'd come to dying out there. How if he'd been 10 minutes later, if he'd collapsed before reaching the porch, they would have found his frozen body in the morning. "Tom," she said quietly, "what if I'm making it worse?" "Making what worse?" "Whatever he's running from, by being here. By—" She stopped, unsure how to articulate the tangle of feelings in her chest. "I was supposed to be simple. A transaction. But I don't think anything about this is simple anymore." Tom was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Life ain't simple, girl. People who tell you it is are either lying or selling something. What you and Caleb got, yeah, it's complicated. But complicated ain't always bad. It is if it hurts him. And what about you? What if it hurts you?" Elena didn't have an answer for that. Caleb woke near dawn. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. His eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them, and he tried to sit up before the pain in his side made him gasp. "Don't move," Elena said immediately, her hand on his shoulder. "You're hurt." He blinked at her, still disoriented. "What? Where?" "You made it back to the house last night, barely. You've got a gash in your side that Tom and I stitched up. You need to rest." Caleb's jaw tightened as memory returned. "The fence." "Can wait." "You can't." She pressed him back down when he tried to rise again. "You almost died out there. You're not going anywhere until you've healed." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're stubborn and stupid and lucky to be alive." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, at being spoken to that way. "I had to check the fence." "No, you didn't. You wanted to check the fence. There's a difference." Elena's frustration boiled over, all the fear and worry of the long night transforming into anger. "What were you thinking? Going out in that storm alone? No backup? No plan for if something went wrong?" "I've done it 100 times. And this time you almost didn't make it back." Her voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what that was like? Waiting here, not knowing if you were alive or dead? Seeing you collapse on the porch, half frozen and bleeding?" Caleb stared at her. "Why do you care?" The question hit like a physical blow. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Because I'm not made of stone, Caleb. Because I'm a human being who doesn't want to see another human being die. Because—" She stopped. Couldn't say the rest. Couldn't admit that somewhere along the way, this arrangement had stopped being business and started being something else entirely. "Because what?" His voice was softer now, his eyes searching her face. "Because you matter," she said finally. "Whether you want to or not. Whether I want you to or not. You matter." The silence that followed felt heavy and fragile at the same time. Caleb's hand moved slightly on the blanket, like he wanted to reach for her but couldn't quite make himself do it. "I didn't ask you to care," he said. "I know. I care anyway." He closed his eyes. "That's a mistake." "Probably." Elena stood, needing distance, before she said something she couldn't take back. "I'll make breakfast. You need to eat." She left him on the couch and went to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she worked. She heard Tom come downstairs, heard the low murmur of conversation between the two men, but she didn't join them. She needed time to collect herself. to rebuild the walls Caleb had so thoroughly demolished without even trying. When breakfast was ready, eggs and bacon and fresh bread, she brought it to the front room. Tom had helped Caleb sit up, propping him against the arm of the couch with pillows. He looked better than he had a few hours ago, but the pain was still there in the tightness around his eyes. "Eat," she said, handing him a plate. "All of it." Caleb took the plate without argument. He was learning, apparently, that when Elena used that particular tone, resistance was futile. They ate together, the three of them, while pale winter light filtered through the windows and revealed the extent of the storm's damage. Snow had drifted against the side of the house in waves 3 feet high. The path to the barn was completely buried. Several fence posts visible from the window had snapped under the weight of ice. "Gonna take days to dig out from this," Tom observed. "And that fence line you were so worried about? Definitely gonna need repair now." Caleb grunted, which wasn't quite agreement, but wasn't disagreement either. "You're staying inside until that wound heals," Elena said. It wasn't a suggestion. "I've got work." "Tom can handle the work, can't you, Tom?" The old foreman grinned. "Sure can. Been running this place half the time anyway." Caleb glared at him, but there was no real heat in it. He was too tired, too sore, and probably too aware that they were right. For the next 3 days, Caleb was confined to the house. Elena appointed herself his nurse, changing his bandages, checking for signs of infection, making sure he ate regularly and didn't do anything stupid like try to work. He was a terrible patient, restless, irritable, constantly trying to get up and do things he had no business doing. "Sit down," Elena said for the 100th time when she caught him trying to put on his boots. "You're going to tear those stitches." "I'm going crazy just sitting here." "Then go crazy sitting down. You're not going outside." Caleb muttered something that was probably profane, but he sat back down. Elena hid her smile as she went back to the kitchen. He might not like being taken care of, but he was accepting it. That felt like progress. On the 4th day, something shifted. Elena was reading by the fire that evening when Caleb spoke from the couch where he'd been lying with his eyes closed. "Why didn't you leave Boston sooner?" She looked up, surprised. It was the first personal question he'd asked her that wasn't directly related to their arrangement. "What do you mean?" "You said your father had debts. That can't have happened overnight, so why didn't you leave before it all fell apart?" Elena set down her book. "Because I kept thinking he'd fix it, that he'd stop gambling, stop making bad investments, stop pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't." She stared into the fire. "I believed in him longer than I should have. By the time I accepted the truth, it was too late." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I know something about believing in people longer than you should." "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. "I saw the signs. The way she'd go quiet sometimes, staring out the window like she was somewhere else, the way she flinched when I touched her. But I told myself it was just adjustment, that she'd learned to love this place, love me." His laugh was bitter. "Turns out you can't make someone want something they've already decided against." "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I brought her here, promised her a life she never wanted, got angry when she couldn't pretend to be happy." "She married you," Elena pointed out. "She made a choice." "Yeah, the wrong one." Caleb shifted on the couch, wincing slightly. "I keep thinking about that. If I'd been different, if I'd been more, I don't know, more something, maybe she would have stayed." Elena moved to sit on the floor beside the couch, close enough to see his face in the firelight. Or maybe she would have left anyway, because she was in love with someone else, and nothing you did could change that. "You don't know that. Neither do you. But you've spent 3 years blaming yourself for someone else's decision. That's not fair to you." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, there was no wall between them. Just 2 wounded people sitting by a fire, talking about pain they'd both been carrying alone. "When she left," he said quietly, "I promised myself I'd never let anyone matter that much again. Safer that way. Is it working?" A long pause. Then, "No." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. Elena reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she took his hand. His fingers were rough and calloused, scarred from years of hard work, but they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "I know." We had a deal, clear boundaries, no complications. I know. So what do we do now? Caleb's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. I don't know. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the firelight while the Montana night pressed against the windows. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. But it was honest, and that felt like enough for now. Over the following weeks, something fundamental changed between them. Caleb still worked long hours. His wound healed faster than Elena would have liked. But he started coming back earlier, started sitting with her after dinner instead of immediately retreating to his room, started talking. He told her about building the ranch, about the backbreaking labor of felling trees and hauling stone, about the first winter when he'd nearly starved because he didn't know how to preserve food properly. He told her about his childhood in Ohio, about leaving home at 16 with nothing but a horse and $50, about the years of drifting before he'd found this land and decided to make it mean something. Elena told him about Boston, about the suffocating expectations of society, about her mother who died when she was 12 and left her alone with a father who loved her but couldn't stop destroying himself. She told him about the creditors who'd shown up the day after the funeral, about selling everything she owned piece by piece, about the moment she'd realized she had nothing left but her ability to survive. They shared meals and silence and gradually, carefully, something that felt dangerously close to intimacy. The nights Caleb came to her room changed too. There was still purpose behind them. The arrangement hadn't ended, but there was also tenderness now. He touched her like she was something precious instead of necessary. He stayed afterward, sometimes for hours, talking in the darkness or just lying beside her, their breathing synchronized. "This is a bad idea," Elena whispered one night, her head on his chest. She felt him nod. "Terrible idea." "We should stop." "Probably." Neither of them moved. Tom watched their transformation with knowing eyes, but said nothing. He just smiled slightly whenever he caught them looking at each other when they thought no one was watching, or when Caleb lingered over breakfast to talk to Elena instead of rushing out to work. February brought more storms, but also occasional breaks in the weather, days when the sun broke through and turned the snow into fields of diamonds. On one of those days, Caleb took Elena riding. He'd been teaching her slowly, carefully, and she discovered she liked it, the power of the horse beneath her, the freedom of movement, the way the world looked different from up high. They rode out to the north fence line, the one Caleb had nearly died checking, and worked together to repair the damage the winter had done. "You're getting good at this," Caleb said as Elena helped him string new wire between posts. "I had a good teacher." He glanced at her, something soft in his eyes. "You're not what I expected." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." He secured the wire and straightened, brushing snow off his gloves. "When you answered the advertisement, I thought, I don't know what I thought. Someone desperate. Someone beaten down. Someone who'd be grateful for whatever I offered and wouldn't ask questions." "I am desperate," Elena pointed out. "No, you were desperate. There's a difference." He moved to the next post and she followed. "You came here with nothing, but you didn't act like nothing. You showed up and immediately started taking up space, making noise, refusing to disappear. It was—" He stopped, searching for words. "It was terrifying." "Terrifying?" "Yeah, because I realized pretty quick that you weren't going to let me keep hiding." Elena felt her heart squeeze. "Is that what you were doing? Hiding? For 3 years. Built these walls, kept everyone out, told myself it was strength. Then you showed up and started knocking holes in every defense I had." They stood there in the snow, the wind cold on their faces, the silence broken only by distant bird calls. Elena wanted to kiss him, wanted to close the distance between them and let this moment become what it was trying to be. But she was afraid that if they acknowledged what was happening, if they named it, the whole fragile structure would collapse. Caleb seemed to feel it too. He cleared his throat, looked away, went back to work. They rode home as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. At the barn, Caleb helped Elena dismount, his hands on her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough to share breath. His eyes searched her face like he was trying to memorize it. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Before she could respond, he turned away to tend to the horses, leaving her standing in the gathering darkness with her heart pounding and her carefully constructed walls in ruins around her feet. That night, he came to her room again. But instead of the usual careful distance, he pulled her close and held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. They made love, and it was making love now, Elena realized, not just sex, not just obligation, with a desperation that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Caleb spoke into her hair. "I'm falling for you." 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Elena's breath caught. "Caleb, I know we weren't supposed to. I know it complicates everything, but I can't." His arms tightened around her. "I can't keep pretending this is just an arrangement anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want more than a year, more than a child, more than—" He pulled back to look at her face. "I want you. All of you. For real." Tears stung Elena's eyes. This was everything she'd been afraid to want, everything she'd told herself was impossible. And now he was offering it to her, raw and honest and terrifying. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered. "What if we try and it falls apart? Then it falls apart. But at least we tried." His hand cupped her face. "I spent 3 years being afraid. I'm tired of it. I'd rather risk everything than keep living like this, half alive, half numb, pretending I don't feel what I feel." Elena kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she found her voice. "I'm falling for you too. I have been for weeks. Maybe since the beginning." His smile was small but genuine, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "So what do we do?" "I don't know. Figure it out as we go?" "That's not much of a plan. It's all I've got." Caleb kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "Then I guess we'll make it work." They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, the Montana winter howling outside while inside, 2 broken people began the slow, terrifying work of putting each other back together. Morning came too bright, sunlight streaming through the window and turning the frost on the glass into prisms of light. Elena woke to find Caleb already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed pulling on his boots. She reached for him, her hand finding his back. "Stay," she murmured, still half asleep. He turned, and the look on his face made her chest tighten. It was soft, unguarded, the kind of expression she'd spent weeks hoping to see. He leaned down and kissed her, slow and sweet. "I've got fence work," he said against her lips. "That section by the ravine won't fix itself. Take Tom with you. Tom's got his hands full with the cattle. I'll be fine." He kissed her again, then stood. "Besides, it's a clear day. No storms forecast. I'll be back by lunch." Elena sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the cold. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't name it. Just a tightness in her stomach, an unease she tried to shake off. "Be careful," she said. Caleb paused at the door, glanced back. "Always am." But he wasn't. That was the problem. Caleb took risks like other men took breaths, constantly, without thinking, as if danger was just another part of the landscape to navigate. She'd seen it in the way he worked, the chances he took climbing on roofs during ice storms, handling spooked horses, walking too close to the edge of things. She should have insisted he wait, should have made him take Tom, should have done something other than watch him walk out the door. The morning passed slowly. Elena cleaned the kitchen, started bread dough, mended a tear in one of Caleb's shirts. Ordinary tasks that felt anything but ordinary now that everything between them had changed. She kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until he'd be home. Noon came and went. By 1 o'clock, Elena was standing at the window, watching the road. The sky was still clear, the sun bright on the snow, but that unease in her stomach had grown into something sharper. Tom came in through the back door, stamping snow off his boots. "Boss back yet?" he asked. "No." Tom frowned, checked the clock. "He say what time he'd be done?" "Lunch. He said he'd be back by lunch." They looked at each other, and Elena saw her own worry reflected in the old foreman's eyes. "Could be the work's taking longer than he thought," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That section's in rough shape? Or something's wrong. Let's not jump to conclusions. Give him another hour. If he's not back by 2, I'll ride out and check." Elena nodded, but the waiting was agony. She tried to distract herself with work, but her hands shook and her mind kept conjuring scenarios. Caleb fallen, injured, unable to get back to his horse. Caleb caught in another storm that hadn't been forecast. Caleb lying somewhere in the snow, bleeding, alone. 2 o'clock arrived. No Caleb. Tom was already saddling his horse when Elena came running to the barn. I'm coming with you, she said. Elena? Don't argue. You'll need help if he's hurt. Tom looked like he wanted to protest, but he just nodded and saddled a second horse. They rode out fast, following the path Caleb would have taken toward the north fence line. The snow was deep in places, slowing them down, but Tom knew the land and picked the easiest route. The temperature was dropping. Elena could feel it in the way the air bit at her exposed skin, the way her breath came out in thicker clouds. The sun was already starting its descent toward the mountains, and up here, darkness came early and fast. How much farther? Elena called over the sound of hoofbeats. Another mile, maybe less. The ravine's just past that ridge. They crested the ridge, and Elena's heart stopped. Caleb's horse stood alone near the fence line, still saddled, reins dragging in the snow. No sign of Caleb. Tom was off his horse before it fully stopped, Elena right behind him. They found the fence, partially repaired, tools scattered in the snow as if dropped suddenly, and then they saw the tracks, leading to the edge of the ravine. No, Elena whispered. The ravine was deep, maybe 20 feet, its sides steep and covered in ice. At the bottom, barely visible in the shadows, she saw him. Caleb lay crumpled against the far wall, not moving. Caleb! Elena screamed, already running toward the edge. Tom grabbed her arm. Don't. The edge is unstable. You go over too, and we're all dead. We have to get down there. Tom was already assessing the slope, his face grim. It's too steep, too icy. We need rope, equipment. We don't have time for that. Look at him, Tom. He's not moving. As if in response to her voice, Caleb stirred. His hand moved slightly, and his head turned toward the sound. Even from this distance, Elena could see blood on his face. Caleb, she called again. Can you hear me? His eyes opened, found her. His lips moved, but no sound reached them. I'm going down, Elena said. Like hell you are. You'll break your neck. Then what do we do? Ride back for rope? That'll take an hour at least, and it'll be dark by then. He could die waiting. Tom's jaw worked. He knew she was right. If you go down there, you might not be able to get back up. I know. You could both freeze to death before I get back with help. I know that too. Tom stared at her, and she saw the moment he accepted what she was going to do. You're as stubborn as he is. Probably why this works. Despite everything, Tom almost smiled. All right, let me find the best way down. And Elena, if you die down there, he'll kill me, so don't. They spent precious minutes searching for the least treacherous path. Finally, Tom pointed to a section where rocks jutted out at intervals, creating natural handholds. It was still dangerous. One slip would send her tumbling, but it was possible. Take my coat, Tom said, already shrugging out of it. You'll need the extra layer, and here. He pressed a small flask into her hand. Whiskey. If he's conscious, it might help with the pain. Elena pulled on the coat, pocketed the flask, and approached the edge. Looking down made her stomach lurch, but she didn't let herself hesitate. Caleb needed her. That was all that mattered. The descent was nightmare. The rocks were slick with ice, her boots kept sliding, and more than once she caught herself just before falling. Her hands were scraped raw within minutes, her shoulders screaming from gripping so hard. But she kept going, finding each foothold, testing each handhold, moving down inch by terrible inch. When her feet finally hit the bottom, her legs nearly gave out. She steadied herself against the ravine wall and looked around. Caleb was 15 feet away, propped against the opposite wall. His eyes were open now, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Elena scrambled across the uneven ground and dropped to her knees beside him. You idiot, she said, her voice breaking. What happened? Fence broke. Lost my footing. His words came slow and slurred. Stupid. His right leg was bent at an angle that made Elena's stomach turn. His face was pale, except where blood had dried in a trail from his temple to his jaw. When she touched his shoulder, he flinched. Where are you hurt? Legs broken, maybe some ribs. Hit my head pretty good. He tried to smile and failed. Could be worse. Could be worse? Caleb, you're at the bottom of a ravine with a broken leg and a head injury. But I'm alive. And you're here. His hand found hers, gripped it weakly. You shouldn't have come down. Where else would I be? Above them, Tom's voice echoed down. How bad is it? Elena called back. Broken leg for sure, head injury, possible broken ribs. I'm riding for help. There's a ranch about 5 miles east. They've got rope and manpower. I'll be back as fast as I can, but it'll be at least 2 hours. You two stay put and stay warm." The sound of hoofbeats faded quickly, leaving them alone in the ravine with the light already starting to fail. Elena looked around, trying to think. The ravine protected them from the wind, which was good, but it also trapped the cold. The temperature was dropping fast, and neither of them had enough layers for a prolonged wait in these conditions. She was already shivering. "We need to keep you warm," she said, shrugging out of Tom's coat. "Keep it. You need it more than I do. Don't be stupid. You're in shock, you've lost blood, and you're not moving around generating heat. Take the damn coat." They argued about it until Caleb gave in, too weak to really fight. Elena draped the coat over him, then sat down beside him and pulled him against her, sharing what body heat she could. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Tell me what happened," she said, partly to keep him talking, partly because she needed to know. Caleb's voice was getting softer. "Was replacing a post. Fence line gave way, rotted wood I didn't see. Went down before I knew what was happening." "How long were you down here before we came?" "Don't know. Hour, maybe. Tried to climb out, but the leg—" He trailed off, his breathing shallow. Elena felt panic rising. "Stay awake, Caleb. You have to stay awake." "Tired. I know. But if you have a concussion, you can't sleep. So you're going to talk to me. Tell me about—" She searched for something, anything. "Tell me about the first time you saw this land." He was quiet so long she thought he'd passed out. Then, slowly, he started talking. "Was riding through. Didn't plan to stop. But I crested that ridge and saw all this—" He gestured weakly. "Empty space. No people, no buildings, nothing but land and sky. And I thought I could build something here. Something that was mine. Something nobody could take away. And you did." "Yeah. For all the good it did me." His head lolled against her shoulder. "Wasn't supposed to be alone, though. Had plans, a family, a real life. You still can have that." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "Look at me, Elena, broken at the bottom of a ravine. This is what I do. I break things. Break myself. Break people around me. That's not true. Isn't it? Sarah left because I couldn't make her happy. And you came here for a simple transaction, and I've turned it into this mess." Elena turned his face toward her, made him look at her. "This isn't a mess. This is real. This is two people who were broken finding each other and trying to put the pieces back together. That's not wrong, Caleb. What if I can't be fixed? What if you don't need to be?" She brushed hair back from his forehead, careful of the gash. "Maybe we're both exactly as broken as we need to be. Maybe that's the point." "That doesn't make sense. Since when does any of this make sense?" He smiled then, a real smile despite the pain. "Since you showed up and refused to disappear." The light was fading fast now, the ravine filling with shadows. Elena could barely see Caleb's face, could only feel the weight of him against her and the slow rise and fall of his chest. The cold was getting worse. She could feel it seeping into her bones, making her fingers numb, her thoughts sluggish. "Talk to me," Caleb said, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay awake." "I'm awake." "Barely. Tell me something. Something I don't know about you." Elena tried to think through the fog of cold and fear. "When I was little, I wanted to be a painter, not portraits or landscapes, something different, abstract shapes, colors that didn't exist in nature. My mother encouraged it, but after she died, my father said it was impractical, that I needed to focus on being marriageable. You should paint again." "Maybe I will. When spring comes, I'll paint the mountains, make them purple and green and colors they've never been." "I'd like to see that." They fell quiet. Above them, stars were starting to appear in the narrow strip of sky visible between the ravine walls. Elena had never seen stars like that in Boston, so bright they looked close enough to touch, so many they turned the darkness into something almost light. "Elena," Caleb said, and something in his voice made her heart clench. "What? If I don't make it? Don't say that. Listen." His hand tightened on hers. "If I don't make it, I need you to know, these past months, they've been the best of my life. Even with all the fear and the fighting and the walls, you made me feel something I thought I'd lost, You made me want to try again. Tears froze on Elena's cheeks. You're going to make it. Tom's bringing help. We just have to wait. But if I don't, then I'll run this ranch. I'll take care of the cattle and fix the fences and keep your legacy alive. I'll do all of it. But you're going to make it, Caleb. You have to. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft she almost didn't hear it. I love you. The words hit her like a physical force. 3 words she'd been afraid to hope for. 3 words that changed everything. I love you too, she whispered back. So you better not die on me, because I didn't come all this way and climb down into this frozen hell just to lose you. Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Bossy. You like it? Yeah, I do. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and tasting of blood and snow. When they broke apart, Elena pressed her forehead against his and just breathed, counting his heartbeats, feeling him alive against her. The cold got worse. Much worse. Elena's entire body was shaking now, and Caleb had gone worryingly still. She kept talking to him, telling him stories about Boston, about her childhood, about anything she could think of to keep them both conscious. But her words were slurring, her thoughts fragmenting. Time became strange. She couldn't tell if they'd been in the ravine for 1 hour or 10. The stars wheeled overhead. The cold became absolute. And through it all, she held Caleb and refused to let go. Sing something, Caleb mumbled at some point, his voice barely audible. I can't sing. Don't care. Just want to hear your voice. So Elena sang. Old songs her mother had taught her, half-remembered melodies that came out broken and off-key. But Caleb's breathing steadied when she sang, and his hand stayed locked with hers, so she kept going. She was in the middle of a lullaby when she heard the voices. At first she thought she was imagining them, her mind creating rescue that wasn't coming. But then light bloomed above the ravine, lanterns held by shadowy figures, and Tom's voice called down, We're here! Hold on! Elena wanted to respond but couldn't make her mouth work. She just held Caleb tighter and waited. The rescue was chaos. Men with ropes and equipment descended into the ravine, their movements efficient and sure. Someone wrapped a blanket around Elena's shoulders. Someone else was checking Caleb's injuries, securing his leg for the climb-up. Voices shouted instructions, hands lifted and supported, and then they were moving. Getting Caleb out of the ravine took careful work. They'd rigged a pulley system, and 6 men hauled while 2 more guided the stretcher up the icy slope. Elena climbed separately, too numb to feel her own hands on the rope, too focused on watching Caleb being lifted to safety to think about her own danger. When she finally reached the top, her legs gave out. Someone caught her, Tom she realized, and half-carried her to where horses waited. Caleb was already secured to a makeshift litter, unconscious now, his face gray in the lantern light. Is he... Elena couldn't finish the question. Alive, Tom said. Barely. We need to move fast. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Elena couldn't stop shaking, couldn't get warm, couldn't think about anything except Caleb's still form on the litter. When they finally reached the house, men carried him inside and laid him on the bed in his room, the room he'd been sharing with Elena, though nobody commented on that. A doctor had been summoned from the fort, but he wouldn't arrive until morning. Until then, all they could do was keep Caleb warm and hope. Tom practically forced Elena into the washroom, made her strip off her frozen clothes and get into a hot bath. She sat in the water until it stopped steaming, until her fingers and toes stopped being numb and started hurting, until she could think clearly enough to worry properly about Caleb. She dressed in dry clothes and went straight to his room. Someone had cleaned his wounds and set his leg, Tom probably, or one of the ranch hands who'd helped with the rescue. Caleb lay still under a mountain of blankets, his breathing shallow but steady. Elena pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand. Don't you dare die, she whispered. Not after everything. Not after finally telling me you love me. You don't get to say something like that and then leave. His fingers twitched in hers. Not much, but enough to tell her he could hear. She stayed there all night, holding his hand, watching him breathe, refusing to sleep in case he slipped away when she wasn't looking. Tom brought her coffee and food she didn't eat. Dawn came gray and cold, painting the room in shades of winter light. And finally, Caleb's eyes opened. He looked confused at first, disoriented. Then his gaze found Elena, and something in his expression softened. You're still here, he said, his voice rough. Where else would I be? Somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere that isn't. He gestured weakly. This. Elena leaned forward, her face close to his. This is exactly where I want to be, with you, in this drafty house in the middle of nowhere, Montana, because this is home now. You're home. Caleb's hand came up to touch her face. I meant it, what I said in the ravine. I know. I love you, Elena, not because of the arrangement or the child or any of that. Just you. I know that too. She kissed his palm. And I love you. Your stubbornness and your walls and your terrible habit of almost dying, all of it. That's a lot to take on. Good thing I'm up for it. He smiled, a real full smile that transformed his entire face. Yeah, I guess you are. The doctor arrived an hour later and confirmed what they'd suspected. Broken leg, 3 cracked ribs, concussion, various cuts and bruises. Caleb would heal, but it would take time. Weeks, maybe months before he was back to full strength. You're lucky to be alive, the doctor said bluntly. Another few hours in that cold, and you'd both be dead. After he left, Elena sat on the edge of Caleb's bed and took his hand again. No more working alone, she said firmly. Ever. You take Tom or one of the hands or me, but you don't go out by yourself. Elena, I'm serious, Caleb. I can't do this again. I can't watch you almost die and wonder if you're going to make it. So you're going to be careful, and you're going to let people help you, and you're going to stop acting like you're invincible. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. All right? You climbed into a ravine to save me. Least I can do is promise not to fall into another one. Elena laughed, surprising herself. That's a low bar. It's a start. She leaned down and kissed him, gentle and careful of his injuries. When she pulled back, his eyes were serious. I want to marry you, he said. For real. Not because of the contract or the arrangement, because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Elena's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. I know it's complicated, but I needed you to know. When I was down in that ravine thinking I might die, all I could think was that I wished I'd made this real. Made us real. His thumb traced circles on her hand. So whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm asking. Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were different tears than the ones she'd cried in the ravine. These were tears of something that felt dangerously like joy. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. For real. Not because I have to, because I want to. The smile that broke across Caleb's face was worth every frozen minute in that ravine, worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. He pulled her down for another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. We're really doing this, she said. Yeah, we really are. It's probably going to be a disaster. Probably. Caleb's arms tightened around her. But it'll be our disaster. Outside, the Montana winter continued its assault on the land. But inside, in that small room with its frost-covered windows and drafty walls, 2 people who'd thought they were beyond saving had found something neither had been looking for. They'd found each other. And for the first time in years, the future didn't look like survival. It looked like hope. Caleb's recovery was slower than either of them wanted, and twice as frustrating. The broken leg meant crutches for weeks, then a cane, then a limp that the doctor said might never fully go away. The cracked ribs made breathing painful and sleeping worse, and the concussion left him with headaches that came without warning and turned him irritable and withdrawn. Elena learned quickly that injured Caleb was somehow more difficult than healthy Caleb had ever been. I don't need help, he snapped one morning when she tried to assist him down the stairs. Your pride isn't going to catch you when you fall. I'm not going to fall. You said that yesterday, right before you fell. He glared at her, but she could see the pain underneath the anger. Being helpless didn't sit well with a man who'd built his entire identity around self-sufficiency. She understood that. Didn't make it less annoying. Let me help you, she said, softer this time. Please. Something in his face shifted. He nodded once, stiff and reluctant, and let her take his arm. They made it down the stairs without incident. Small victories. Tom handled most of the ranch work during those weeks, and Elena discovered she had a knack for managing the parts Tom couldn't cover. She learned to keep the books, track inventory, coordinate with the hands about which cattle needed attention. It wasn't painting abstract shapes in impossible colors, but it was hers. She was building something here, same as Caleb had. March brought the first hints of thaw. The snow started melting in patches, revealing dead grass underneath and mud that sucked at boots. The temperature climbed just enough to make the cold bearable instead of brutal. And with the changing weather came a change in Caleb, too. Less frustration, more acceptance. He was healing, slowly but healing. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Caleb cleared his throat in that way he did when he was working up to saying something difficult. "I've been thinking about the wedding," he said. Elena looked up from the sock she was darning. "What about it?" "When you want to do it, how you want to do it." He shifted in his chair, his legs stretched out in front of him. "I know you probably had ideas, before, about what a wedding should be." She set down her mending. "Before, I thought I'd have a big church ceremony in Boston with 200 guests I didn't care about, and a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Before doesn't matter anymore." "It might. To you. It doesn't." Elena moved to sit on the floor beside his chair, her hand finding his. "I don't need any of that, Caleb. I just need you." He looked down at her, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "There's a minister at the fort. Comes through once a month. We could do it simple. Tom as witness. Maybe a few of the hands if you want." "That sounds perfect." "You sure? Because if you want more—" "I want you," she interrupted. "Everything else is just details." Caleb pulled her up into his lap, careful of his ribs, and kissed her until they were both breathless. When they broke apart, his eyes held that soft look she'd grown to love, the one that said he was letting her see past all the walls. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." He laughed, and the sound filled something in her chest she hadn't known was empty. The minister was scheduled to visit the fort on the last Sunday in March. They made plans, simple ones, just like they'd discussed. Elena would wear her best dress, the blue one she'd brought from Boston and never had occasion to use. Caleb would wear his only suit, the one he'd worn to funerals and nothing else. Tom would stand witness. They'd say their vows, sign the papers, and that would be that. But as the day approached, Elena found herself wanting something more. Not the big ceremony, not the crowd of strangers, just something that marked this as different, as real, as theirs. She mentioned it to Tom one afternoon while they were checking on the pregnant heifers in the barn. "I want to give him something," she said, "for the wedding, but I don't know what." Tom leaned against a stall door considering. "What does he need?" "That's the problem. He doesn't need anything, or if he does, he won't admit it." "Then what does he want?" Elena thought about that. Caleb wanted the ranch to succeed, wanted the cattle healthy and the fences strong and the work done right, wanted to prove he could build something lasting, but those weren't things she could wrap up and hand him. "I don't know," she admitted. Tom was quiet for a moment, then, "He's got his mother's ring, kept it all these years even after Sarah left. Been meaning to give it to you, I think, but he's nervous about it." "Why would he be nervous?" "Because it meant something to him once. His mother gave it to his father, and they had 50 good years together. Caleb wore it when he married Sarah, and that didn't work out so well." Tom pulled a piece of straw from the hay bale, twirled it between his fingers. "He's afraid it's cursed or something. Silly, but there it is." Elena absorbed this information. "Where is it?" "Top drawer of his dresser. Small wooden box." That evening, after Caleb had gone to sleep, Elena crept into his room. She felt guilty going through his things, but curiosity won out. The box was exactly where Tom said it would be. Small, carved wood, worn smooth with age. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a simple gold band. No elaborate setting, no expensive stone, just pure, honest gold that had been worn and loved for generations. She slipped it on her finger. Perfect fit. The next day she rode into town. A journey that took most of the morning but was worth it for what she needed to do. The general store had limited options, but she found what she was looking for. A plain gold band similar to his mother's ring. Simple. Honest. Real. She had the shopkeeper engrave the inside with 3 words, "Against all odds." Because that's when they were. 2 broken people who'd found each other against every reasonable expectation, who'd built something real out of a transaction, who'd chosen each other when neither had been looking for choice. The day before the wedding, Elena woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. His leg was better. He only used the cane now when he was tired, but he still moved carefully, protecting his ribs. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Nervous," he admitted. "About tomorrow?" "About everything." He turned to look at her, and his face was open in the early morning light. "What if I'm not good at this? Being a husband, being happy." Elena took his hand. "You think I'm good at being a wife? I've never done this either. We'll figure it out together. That's what I'm afraid of, that I'll drag you down, that my damage will hurt you. Caleb." She made him look at her. "We're both damaged, that's the point. We don't have to be perfect, we just have to be honest." He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. They stood like that for a long time, watching the sun turn the snow-covered fields gold and pink, breathing together, being still in a way neither of them was particularly good at. "I got you something," he said finally. "For tomorrow." "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." He pulled back and reached into his pocket, producing the small wooden box Elena had found days earlier. "It's not much, and I understand if you don't want to wear it, given the history." She opened the box, pretending she hadn't already seen the ring. "It's beautiful. It was my mother's. She gave it to my father when they married, and he wore it for 50 years, never took it off, even when she died." Caleb's voice was rough. "I wore it when I married Sarah. Thought it would bring the same kind of luck. But maybe the luck ran out. Or maybe I just chose wrong." Elena pulled the ring from the box and held it up to the light. It glowed warm and alive, full of history and meaning. "This ring isn't cursed, Caleb. Sarah was the wrong person. That's not the ring's fault." "You sure?" Instead of answering, she slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her hand. "I'm sure." Caleb's eyes went bright. He pulled her into a kiss that tasted like relief and hope, and all the words neither of them knew how to say. When they broke apart, Elena reached into her own pocket and produced the band she'd bought in town. "I got you something too." His hand shook slightly as he took the ring, examining it. Simple gold, well made, honest. Then he saw the inscription inside and his breath caught. "Against all odds," he read aloud, "because that's what we are, what we've always been." He slipped the ring onto his finger, and Elena watched it settle there like it belonged. Like maybe they both belonged, finally, after years of being lost. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. Elena woke alone. Caleb had spent the night in his old room at Tom's insistence that it was bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony. She dressed carefully, the blue dress smoothing over her body in a way that made her feel almost pretty. She'd never been beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong, her frame too angular, but when she looked in the mirror that morning, she saw something better than pretty. She saw a woman who'd survived, who'd fought, who'd chosen her own path. Tom knocked on her door around 8. "Wagon's ready when you are." The ride to the fort took an hour. Tom drove while Elena sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She wasn't nervous about marrying Caleb. That felt as right as anything in her life ever had. But she was nervous about what came after, about building a real marriage instead of an arrangement, about whether she'd know how. "You're thinking too loud," Tom observed. "How do you know I'm thinking it all?" "Because you get this line right here." He tapped the space between his eyebrows. Same one Caleb gets when he's worrying about something. Elena tried to smooth her expression. "I'm not worried." "Didn't say worried, said thinking." Tom kept his eyes on the road. "And for what it's worth, I think you two are going to do just fine." "What makes you so sure?" "Because you already survived the hard part. Everything else is just living." They arrived at the fort to find Caleb waiting outside the small chapel, his suit pressed and his hair actually combed for once. He looked nervous and handsome and entirely unlike the man who'd stared at her so coldly that first day. When he saw her, his face transformed into something that made her chest ache. "You're beautiful," he said as she approached. "You're a terrible liar." "I'm serious, you're—" He seemed to run out of words, so he just pulled her close and held her instead. The minister was waiting inside, an older man with kind eyes and hands weathered by frontier life. He'd done this ceremony 100 times. Married soldiers and settlers, cowboys and shopkeepers, people who'd come west looking for something they couldn't name. But he made it feel special anyway, like their vows meant something beyond the words. Do you, Caleb Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? Caleb's hand was steady as it held hers. I do. And do you, Elena Shaw, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? Elena looked into Caleb's eyes, those eyes that had been so cold once and were now filled with warmth, and felt something settle deep in her bones. I do. The minister smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Caleb kissed her soft and sweet, and when they broke apart, both were crying. Happy tears this time, the kind that came from joy instead of pain. Tom clapped Caleb on the back. Congratulations, boss. You managed not to mess this one up. Day's still young, Caleb said, but he was smiling. They signed the papers that made it official, legal, real. Elena Shaw became Elena Rourke with a few strokes of a pen, and the weight of it hit her all at once. She had a home, a husband, a life that was hers by choice, not circumstance. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, but not uncomfortable. Elena sat close to Caleb in the wagon bed while Tom drove, their hands linked, watching the landscape roll by. Spring was coming. You could see it in the way the snow had retreated from the sunny slopes, in the way the air smelled different, in the way everything felt like it was waking up after a long sleep. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That I'm happy. Really happy. Maybe for the first time in my life. He squeezed her hand. Me too. When they arrived back at the ranch, they found the house transformed. Someone, probably the ranch hands with Tom's direction, had decorated. Wildflowers in mason jars on the table, lanterns strung across the porch, a cake, slightly lopsided but clearly made with care, waiting in the kitchen. Tom, Elena said, her voice thick. You didn't have to do this. Didn't do it alone. Boys wanted to help, said it ain't every day the boss gets hitched. Tom looked embarrassed by the sentiment. Besides, figured you deserved something nice, after everything. The celebration was small but genuine. The ranch hands came by to offer congratulations, each one shaking Caleb's hand and tipping their hats to Elena. Someone produced a fiddle and played songs that were more enthusiasm than skill. Tom made a toast that was surprisingly eloquent for a man of so few words. To Caleb and Elena, he said, raising his glass. Two stubborn fools who somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. May you be as happy as you deserve, and may you deserve a whole lot of happiness. Everyone drank to that. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, Caleb pulled Elena aside. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. They walked out to the ridge overlooking the ranch, the same spot where Elena had stood her first day and felt overwhelmed by the emptiness. Now, looking at it, she saw something different, the barn they'd repaired together, the fence line they'd fixed, the home they were building. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. When I first came here, Caleb said, I thought I was running away. From Sarah, from the pain, from everything, but I was really just running to something I hadn't found yet. And what's that? He turned to face her, his hands cupping her face. You. This. A reason to stop running. Elena kissed him, deep and sure. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. No more running, she said, for either of us. Deal. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, purple and orange and pink and gold. The kind of colors Elena wanted to paint someday. The kind of colors that said anything was possible if you were brave enough to believe in it. That night, they made love as husband and wife. And it was different than all the times before. Not because the mechanics had changed, but because the meaning had. This wasn't transaction or arrangement or even falling in love. This was chosen, committed, real. Afterward, lying tangled together, Caleb traced patterns on Elena's shoulder. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be gone, he admitted, that you'll be gone. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. She turned to face him. You're stuck with me now, legally and everything. He smiled, that full, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Best contract I ever signed. The weeks that followed were different too. Not easier, Life on a Montana ranch was never easy, but fuller somehow. Elena threw herself into learning the work, helping with calving season, riding out to check fence lines with Caleb, managing the household accounts. She discovered she liked the physical labor, the way her body grew stronger, the way accomplishing difficult tasks made her feel capable and alive. Caleb taught her to shoot, to ride better, to read the weather and the cattle and the subtle signs that meant trouble was coming. She taught him to relax, to laugh, to let people in even when it scared him. They taught each other how to be married, fumbling through arguments about stupid things, learning to apologize, figuring out the rhythm of sharing space and life and future. Tom watched it all with quiet satisfaction, like he'd known all along how it would turn out. One morning in early April, Elena woke feeling sick. She barely made it to the wash basin before her stomach emptied itself violently. Caleb was beside her immediately, holding her hair back, his hand warm on her spine. "You all right?" he asked when she finally stopped heaving. "I don't know. Maybe I ate something bad." But it happened again the next day. And the day after that. By the fourth morning, when Elena bent over the basin again, Caleb wasn't asking if she was all right. He was asking a different question entirely. "Could you be pregnant?" Elena froze, one hand braced against the wall. She'd been so caught up in everything else, the wedding, the ranch, learning to be a wife, that she hadn't been paying attention to her body's rhythms. But now that he'd said it, she realized her courses were late. More than late. "Maybe," she said quietly. They looked at each other and Elena saw her own complicated feelings reflected in his face. This was supposed to be part of the plan, why she'd come here in the first place. But now that it might be real, now that there might actually be a child growing inside her, everything felt different. "How do you feel about it?" Caleb asked carefully. "Terrified. Excited. Both." Elena sat on the edge of the bed. "It's one thing to agree to have a baby in theory. It's another thing entirely when it's actually happening." Caleb sat beside her, took her hand. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. Let's just take it one day at a time." Over the next weeks, Elena's symptoms confirmed what they'd suspected. Morning sickness that struck at odd hours. Exhaustion that hit her like a physical force. A tenderness in her breast that made her wince when Caleb touched her. And underneath all of it, a strange mixture of fear and wonder at what her body was doing without her conscious input. The doctor from the fort came to confirm it in late April. He examined Elena, asked questions about her symptoms, and then pronounced what they already knew. She was pregnant. About 2 months along, he estimated. The baby would come sometime in late fall. After he left, Elena and Caleb sat at the kitchen table, not quite looking at each other. "A baby," Elena said, testing the words. "We're going to have a baby." "Yeah." Caleb's hand covered hers on the table. "How are you feeling? Really? Scared? What if I'm not good at it, being a mother? What if I'm not good at being a father?" They looked at each other and started laughing, slightly hysterical laughter that came from fear and joy tangled together. "We're a mess," Elena said when she could breathe again. "Always have been." Caleb pulled her into his lap. "But we're a mess together. That counts for something." As spring turned toward summer, Elena's body changed in ways that were both fascinating and terrifying. Her stomach began to swell, slowly at first, and then more noticeably. Her clothes stopped fitting. Her emotions swung wildly between crying at nothing and laughing at everything. Caleb was patient through all of it, even when she snapped at him for breathing too loud or cried because the sunset was too beautiful. He brought her tea when the nausea was bad, rubbed her feet when they swelled, held her when the fear got too big to carry alone. "I'm being ridiculous," she said one evening after crying over a hen that wouldn't come when called. "You're growing a person. You're allowed to be ridiculous." "I don't feel like myself." "Then be someone new. Be whoever you need to be right now." It was exactly the right thing to say. Elena grabbed his face and kissed him hard, grateful for this man who'd learned to love her in all her complicated, messy reality. By midsummer, the pregnancy was obvious to everyone. The ranch hands started being extra careful around her, like she might break. Tom fussed over her more than Caleb did, constantly checking if she needed anything. And Elena found herself settling into the role despite her fears, talking to the baby when she was alone, imagining what they'd look like, planning for a future that felt more real every day. One evening, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset. Elena's hand rested on her swollen stomach, and as they sat there, the baby kicked. a strong, definite movement that made her gasp. "Caleb, give me your hand." She placed his palm on her stomach and waited. After a moment, the baby kicked again, hard enough that Caleb felt it clearly. His eyes went wide. That's our baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "That's our baby." He moved closer, his hand still on her stomach, and when the baby kicked a third time, he laughed, pure, unguarded joy that Elena had never heard from him before. "Hello in there," he said softly, talking to her stomach. "I'm your father, and I'm going to try really hard not to mess this up." Elena's eyes filled with tears. This man who'd been so afraid of attachment, so convinced he wasn't capable of love, he was already in love with a child he hadn't even met. "You're going to be a good father," she said. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because you're already worrying about it. Bad fathers don't worry." Caleb looked up at her, his eyes bright in the fading light. "I love you, both of you." "We love you too." They sat like that until the stars came out, Caleb's hand on her stomach, feeling their child move and kick and grow. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten. This was something bigger, something real. This was family. Summer stretched long and hot across the Montana plains, and Elena grew round as the harvest moon. By August, she couldn't see her own feet anymore and needed Caleb's help to get out of chairs. Her back ached constantly. Sleep became impossible. The baby kicked all night, and no position felt comfortable for more than 10 minutes. "I'm enormous," she complained one morning, catching sight of herself in the mirror. Caleb looked up from where he was pulling on his boots. "You're beautiful. You have to say that. You're the one who did this to me." "I seem to remember you had something to do with it too." He crossed to her, his hands settling on her swollen belly. "Besides, you are beautiful. Different than before, but still beautiful." Elena wanted to argue, but the baby chose that moment to kick hard against Caleb's palm, and his face lit up with such pure joy that her annoyance evaporated. "Little troublemaker's awake," he said. "Little troublemaker never sleeps. Takes after you." "Takes after you, you mean? Stubborn as hell." They stood like that for a moment, his hands on her stomach, feeling their child move between them. These moments had become sacred, brief islands of peace in the chaos of preparing for a baby neither of them quite knew how to prepare for. The nursery was ready, though calling it a nursery felt generous. It was the small room next to theirs, the one that had been storage when Elena first arrived. Caleb and Tom had spent weeks clearing it out, patching the walls, building a cradle from lumber Caleb had been saving for years. Elena had sewn blankets and tiny clothes, her stitches uneven but made with care. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "What if something goes wrong?" Elena asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing alongside the baby. "During the birth, I mean. Women die doing this." Caleb's arms came around her from behind, careful of her belly. "Nothing's going to go wrong. You don't know that." "No, but the doctor said you're healthy, strong, and we've got everything ready. Clean linens, hot water, medicine. Tom's writing to fetch the doctor the moment you go into labor. And if the doctor doesn't make it in time, then Tom's delivered more calves than I can count. He'll manage." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "That's not reassuring." "I know." Caleb's hand cupped her face. "But I also know you. You climbed into a frozen ravine to save me. You survived Boston society and your father's death and starting over with nothing. You're the strongest person I've ever met. If anyone can do this, it's you." She wanted to believe him. Some days she did. Other days the fear was so big it threatened to swallow her whole. September brought cooler weather and a restlessness Elena couldn't shake. She felt like she was waiting for something enormous to happen, which she was, but the not knowing when made her jumpy and irritable. She snapped at Caleb for small things. Cried over spilled milk, actual spilled milk, not the metaphorical kind. Felt like she was crawling out of her own skin. "This baby needs to come out," she announced one evening at dinner. "Baby comes when baby's ready," Tom said, helping himself to more potatoes. "Well, baby needs to hurry up. I'm ready now." Caleb reached over and squeezed her hand. Soon. But soon turned out to be relative. Days crawled by. Elena waddled around the ranch, uncomfortable and enormous, while Caleb hovered like she might explode at any moment. Tom started sleeping in the main house instead of his cabin, just in case. The doctor sent word that he'd keep his schedule clear for the next few weeks. And still, nothing happened. Until the middle of the night on September 23rd, when Elena woke to a pain that felt like her body was tearing in half. She gasped, grabbing for Caleb in the darkness. "Something's happening!" He was awake instantly. "The baby? I don't—" Another pain hit, stealing her breath. "Yes, the baby." Caleb was out of bed and moving before she could say more, lighting lamps, pulling on clothes, shouting for Tom. Within minutes, the house was chaos. Tom saddling a horse to fetch the doctor, Caleb boiling water and gathering clean linens, Elena trying to breathe through contractions that came faster and harder than she'd expected. "How far apart are the pains?" Tom asked before he left. Elena tried to focus through the haze of discomfort. "I don't know. Close. A few minutes?" Tom and Caleb exchanged a look. "I'll ride fast," Tom said, and then he was gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Caleb helped Elena to the bed, his hands gentle but his face pale with fear. "What can I do?" "I don't know. I've never done this before." "Neither have I." They looked at each other, and despite everything, Elena laughed. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was laughter nonetheless. "We're really not ready for this," she said. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The hours that followed were the longest of Elena's life. Pain came in waves, each one worse than the last, until she couldn't think about anything except getting through the next contraction and the next and the next. Caleb stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she screamed that she couldn't do this. "You can," he said. "You are doing it." "I'm going to die." "You're not going to die. Women die doing this all the time." "You're not going to die," he repeated, firmer this time. "I won't let you." Another contraction hit, and Elena squeezed his hand so hard she felt something pop. Caleb didn't even flinch, just held on and breathed with her until it passed. Dawn was breaking when Tom finally returned with the doctor, a full 6 hours after he'd left. Elena had been in labor for 7 hours at that point, and she was exhausted, terrified, and absolutely certain she was going to die. The doctor examined her quickly, his weathered hands gentle. "You're doing fine," he said. "Baby's positioned right. Everything looks good. Now comes the hard part." "What was the easy part?" Elena gasped. He smiled slightly. "You're about to find out." What followed was pain unlike anything Elena had imagined. The doctor coached her through pushing, and Caleb stayed at her side, his face gray but his presence steady. She screamed. She cursed. She told Caleb this was all his fault and she hated him. He took it all without complaint, just kept telling her she was doing great. She was almost there, just a little more. And then, with a final push that felt like it might actually kill her, the pressure released. A moment of profound silence. Then a sound that made Elena's heart stop and restart. A baby crying, loud and indignant and alive. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny red-faced creature covered in blood and vernix. Healthy lungs, from the sound of it. Elena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket before placing her on Elena's chest. The baby was impossibly small, impossibly perfect, dark hair plastered to her head, eyes scrunched shut, tiny fists waving in protest at being born into this cold, bright world. She was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. "Hello?" Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "Hello, little one." The baby's crying quieted at the sound of her voice, and those tiny eyes opened just a crack. Dark blue, like all newborns, but already alert and aware. Already looking at her mother with what felt like recognition. Caleb was crying. Elena looked up to see tears streaming down his face, his hand reaching out to touch the baby's head with infinite gentleness. "She's perfect," he said. "She's ours." The doctor finished the necessary work, delivering the afterbirth, checking Elena for tearing, making sure everything was as it should be. Tom hovered in the doorway, his weathered face soft with something that might have been tears. "What are you going to name her?" the doctor asked as he packed up his supplies. Elena and Caleb looked at each other. They discussed names but never settled on one, both too superstitious to choose before the baby arrived safely. "Hope," Elena said suddenly, the word arriving fully formed. "We'll call her Hope." Caleb nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the baby's tiny hand. "Hope Rourke, it fits." Because that's what this child was. Hope made flesh. Proof that broken things could be mended, that two people who'd given up on happiness could find it anyway, that something beautiful could grow in the harshest soil. The doctor left after making sure both mother and baby were stable. Tom brought food that Elena was too exhausted to eat. Caleb refused to leave her side, sitting on the edge of the bed and staring at his daughter like she might disappear if he looked away. "You should sleep," Elena said, though she couldn't stop looking at Hope either. Can't. Too much to look at. Hope yawned, a tiny, perfect yawn that showed pink gums and a miniature tongue. Caleb made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I can't believe she's real," he said. "That we made her." "Believe it. She's definitely real, and definitely ours." Elena tried to shift position and winced. Everything hurt. Her body felt like it had been through a war, which it had. But looking at Hope, feeling her warm weight on her chest, made all of it worth it. "I love you," Caleb said quietly. "Both of you. More than I thought it was possible to love anything." "I love you too." Elena reached for his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on this. On us. For being brave enough to try again." Caleb leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet. "You're the one who was brave. You changed everything." The first weeks with Hope were chaos. She was small but loud, with a set of lungs that could wake the entire ranch. She needed to eat every 2 hours, which meant Elena got no sleep. She cried for reasons no one could determine. She had opinions about everything, how she was held, how her blankets were wrapped, whether the room was too bright or too dark. Elena, exhausted and overwhelmed, found herself crying almost as much as the baby. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said one night after Hope had been screaming for an hour straight. "I've tried feeding her, changing her, rocking her. Nothing works." Caleb took the baby, settling her against his shoulder and pacing the room. "Maybe she just needs to cry." "What kind of mother lets her baby just cry?" "The kind who's been awake for 36 hours straight." He kept walking, his hand gentle on Hope's back. "You're doing fine, Elena. Better than fine. It doesn't feel like it." "That's because you're exhausted. Here." He handed Hope back, now miraculously quiet. "Sleep. I'll take her for a few hours." "You have work." "Work can wait. Sleep." Elena wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down. She lay back on the bed and was asleep before Caleb even left the room. She woke 4 hours later to find him sitting in the rocking chair they'd moved into the bedroom, Hope asleep on his chest, both of them breathing in sync. The sight made her heart ache with love so fierce it was almost painful. Caleb looked up, saw her watching. "She's a fighter," he said softly. "Just like her mother." Over the following weeks, they found a rhythm. Not an easy rhythm, parenting never was, but something that worked for them. Elena learned to read Hope's different cries, to tell the difference between hungry and tired and just plain angry at the world. Caleb proved surprisingly adept at soothing the baby, his deep voice and steady presence calming her when nothing else would. Tom became an unexpected ally, showing up at odd hours with food or offering to hold Hope so Elena could take a bath. The ranch hands took turns bringing gifts, hand-carved toys, tiny knitted hats, a wooden horse that Hope wouldn't be able to use for years, but that made everyone smile anyway. The ranch itself seemed to change with Hope's arrival. The men worked quieter, moved gentler, as if afraid to disturb the baby. There was a softness to the place that hadn't existed before, a sense that they were all protecting something precious. October brought the first snow, early and heavy. Elena stood at the window one morning, Hope in her arms, watching the flakes fall and transform the landscape. "Look," she murmured to the baby, "your first snow." Hope, now 6 weeks old and significantly less angry at the world, watched the window with wide eyes. She couldn't possibly understand what she was seeing, but she seemed fascinated anyway. Caleb came to stand behind them, his arms circling both his girls. "What do you think? Ready for Montana winter?" "I survived last winter. I can survive this one." "Last winter, you weren't responsible for keeping a tiny human alive." Elena leaned back against him. "Last winter, I didn't have you helping me." They stood like that, the three of them, watching the snow fall and the world transform. A year ago, Elena had arrived at this ranch with nothing but desperation and a willingness to survive. Now she had everything: a home, a husband, a daughter. a life built on honesty and choice instead of obligation. I've been thinking, Caleb said after a while. About what? About expanding, maybe adding more cattle next spring, hiring another hand or two, building a bigger barn. That sounds expensive. It would be, but we could do it. The ranch is doing well, and with the Army contract Tom secured, he trailed off. I'm not saying we have to, but we could, if you wanted. Elena understood what he was really asking. Did she want to stay? Not just for the winter or until Hope was weaned, but permanently, forever. Was she ready to make this place truly hers? I want to, she said. I want to build something here. With you. For her. She felt him relax against her, releasing tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. Yeah? Yeah, this is home now. I'm not going anywhere. Hope made a small sound, her tiny hand grasping at Elena's finger. Such a small gesture, but it felt momentous. 3 people who'd been lost, now found. 3 people who'd been broken, now healing. Not perfect. They'd never be perfect. But real. Honest. Theirs. Winter settled in with its usual fury, but inside the ranch house there was warmth. Hope grew steadily, becoming more alert and interactive with each passing day. She started smiling, real smiles, not just gas, and the first time she smiled at Caleb, he cried again. I'm turning into a sentimental fool, he said, wiping his eyes. You're turning into a father, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Christmas came, their first as a real family. They didn't have much. A small tree Tom cut from the ridge, some simple decorations Elena made from scraps of fabric and paper. But Hope didn't care about any of that. She was fascinated by the candlelight, by the colors, by her parents' faces as they sang carols slightly off-key. Merry Christmas, little one, Elena whispered, holding Hope close. Your first of many. Caleb wrapped his arms around them both. Merry Christmas. The new year brought changes. Hope started rolling over, then sitting up, then crawling with a determination that terrified Elena. Suddenly, nothing in the house was safe. Caleb spent his evenings following their daughter around, making sure she didn't eat anything dangerous or pull something heavy onto herself. She's going to give us heart attacks, he said one evening after rescuing Hope from trying to climb into the fireplace. She's going to be just like you, stubborn and fearless and completely unwilling to listen to reason. That's your genetics too. I'm choosing to blame you anyway. Hope pulled herself up on Caleb's pant leg, grinning toothlessly at him. He scooped her up and tossed her in the air, making her shriek with laughter. Elena watched them, her heart so full it hurt. This was what love looked like. Not the romantic ideal she'd once imagined in Boston, all poetry and grand gestures. This was real love, messy and exhausting and occasionally frustrating, but solid, dependable, built on a foundation of choosing each other every single day. Spring came late that year, the snow refusing to release its grip until well into April. But when it finally melted, it revealed a world transformed. Green shoots pushing through dead grass, flowers blooming in impossible colors, Hope taking her first steps, wobbling between Caleb and Elena with fierce concentration. Come here, sweetheart, Elena encouraged, her hands outstretched. You can do it. Hope took 1 step, 2, 3, then toppled into Elena's arms, giggling with delight at her own accomplishment. That's my girl, Caleb said, pride evident in every word. Nothing stops you. By summer, Hope was walking everywhere, talking in a language only she understood, and getting into absolutely everything. The ranch hands adored her, taking turns teaching her about horses and cattle and the land. Tom was particularly smitten, carrying her around on his shoulders and spoiling her with treats Elena pretended not to notice. You're turning her into a tyrant, Elena told him. She's a princess. Princesses get spoiled. She's a rancher's daughter. Ranchers' daughters learn to work. But even as she said it, Elena was smiling. Hope would learn to work. Both she and Caleb would make sure of that. But she'd also know she was loved, cherished, wanted. Everything Elena had wanted as a child and hadn't fully received until she'd found Caleb. One evening in late June, Elena and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset while Hope played at their feet with a collection of smooth stones she'd found by the creek. The sky was doing impossible things with color, purple and orange and pink all bleeding together, and Elena felt peace settle over her like a blanket. I've been thinking about painting again, she said. Caleb looked over at her. Yeah? Yeah, those colors. She gestured at the sky. I want to try to capture them. Probably can't, but I want to try. You should. I'll build you a studio. Nothing fancy, but somewhere you can work. You don't have to do that. I want to. He reached for her hand. I want you to have everything you want, Elena. Even the impractical things, especially those. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I already have everything I want. Greedy, you can have more. Hope abandoned her stones and climbed into Caleb's lap, demanding his attention. He shifted to make room for her, and she settled in with a satisfied sigh, her thumb finding its way to her mouth. She's getting so big, Elena said, watching their daughter's eyes droop with approaching sleep. Too fast. Some days I wish I could freeze time. Keep her just like this. She'd hate that. She's always trying to grow up faster. Wonder where she gets that from. They sat together as the sun finished setting and the stars came out. Hope fell asleep in Caleb's arms, her breathing deep and even. The ranch settled into its nightly rhythm, horses in the barn, cattle in the fields, the land itself seeming to exhale after the work of the day. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, Elena said quietly, that I get to have this. You, her, all of it. I know the feeling. I spent 3 years convinced I'd used up all my chances at happiness. Then you showed up and proved me wrong. I didn't show up. You advertised for me. Best decision I ever made, even if it terrified me at the time. Elena thought about that first day, stepping off the stagecoach into the Montana cold, having no idea what she was walking into. She'd been so desperate, so certain she was making a terrible mistake, but too proud to turn back. And now here she was, a wife, a mother, a woman who belonged somewhere. I'm glad I answered, she said, even though it was probably insane. Definitely insane, but the best kind of insane. Hope stirred in her sleep, one small hand reaching out to grip Caleb's shirt. Such a small gesture, but it said everything about trust and safety and home. We should get her to bed, Elena said reluctantly. Caleb stood carefully, Hope cradled against his chest. I'll take her. You stay. Enjoy the quiet. He disappeared inside, and Elena heard his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the nursery door. She sat alone on the porch, listening to the night sounds, crickets and distant coyotes and wind through the grass, the same sounds that had seemed so foreign and frightening a year and a half ago now felt like home. Caleb returned and settled beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the Montana night wrap around them. You know what I think? Caleb said eventually. What? I think sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never planned for. The ones that scare us into being better than we thought we could be. Elena considered that. Is that what I did? Scared you into being better? You scared me into being real, into admitting I wanted more than just survival, into taking a chance on happiness even when it terrified me. And now? Now I'm still terrified, but I'm also happier than I've ever been. Those things can exist together, turns out. Elena turned to look at him, this man who'd been so cold and closed off when they met, who'd built walls so high he'd thought they were permanent, who'd learned, slowly and painfully, to let someone in. I love you, she said. Love you too. Both of you. More than I knew it was possible to love. They kissed, soft and slow, tasting of coffee and contentment. When they broke apart, both were smiling. We should probably go to bed, Elena said. Hope will be up at dawn demanding breakfast. She gets that from you too. Everything good comes from me. Everything stubborn comes from you. That's not how genetics work. It's how I'm choosing to remember it. They went inside, checking on Hope one last time before heading to their own room. The baby slept peacefully, her dark hair curling against her forehead, her face relaxed and perfect. Elena adjusted her blanket and placed a gentle kiss on her head. In their bedroom, Caleb pulled Elena close, and they lay together in the darkness, listening to the house settle around them. This house that had been just shelter once, just walls and a roof. Now it was filled with life and love and the sound of their daughter breathing down the hall. Thank you, Elena whispered into the darkness. For what? For being brave enough to try again, for letting me in, for building this with me. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Thank you for being stubborn enough not to disappear, for refusing to let me hide, for choosing this even when it was hard. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, their future as uncertain as any future was, but built on a foundation solid enough to weather whatever came. Because that's what they'd learned, these two broken people who'd found each other in the middle of nowhere, Montana. That love wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up, about choosing each other even when it was difficult, about building something real instead of something easy. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something infinitely more binding, commitment made freely, love given honestly, a life built on trust instead of obligation. And as Elena drifted into sleep, hope, safe in the next room, and Caleb's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she understood something fundamental. She hadn't come to Montana to survive. She'd come to Montana to live, to build, to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. The harsh frontier hadn't broken them. It had forged them into something stronger, something real, something that would last. And when Hope grew up and asked about how her parents met, they'd tell her the truth, that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start with nothing but desperation and choice, and grow into something neither person planned but both learned to cherish. They'd tell her that love isn't about fairy tales or perfect moments. It's about two imperfect people deciding they're better together than apart. About building a home not just with walls and a roof, but with honesty and courage and the willingness to keep trying even when you're terrified. And they'd tell her that she, Hope, was the proof that broken things could be mended, that second chances were real, that love could grow in even the harshest soil if you were brave enough to nurture it. The Montana night stretched on, endless and full of stars. Inside the ranch house, 3 people slept, a family not born of tradition or convenience, but chosen, built, fought for, and earned. And in the morning, they'd wake to do it all again, together.